Aloha, everybody. Thank you for joining us today on this webinar and this discussion about our food system. My name is Keoni Lee, and I'm the CEO of Hawaiʻi Investment Ready. But before I get started, can we do a quick poll of who's in the audience so we can get a sense of who we're speaking with today? I'm going to do a quick poll. So it should be up on your screen right now. Just let us know where you're at. Who's here? Give about 15 more seconds to vote. It should be popped up on your screen. All right, I'm going to end the poll. And just for everybody, we can you guys can see who's here on the call with us today. So we have a lot of people from philanthropy, private sector, a bunch of farmers, some government. All right, panelists. So you get a sense of who the audience, who we have with us today. All right. So let me screen share. All right. Today's webinar is brought to you today as part of Hawaiʻi Investment Ready's Leveraging Hawaiʻi Capital Workshop Series and presented in partnership with the organizations you see here on the screen. The purpose for Leveraging Hawaiʻi Capital, and when we started it in 2017, was to uplift expert knowledge and best practices for investing in and capitalizing the solutions needed to address the social and environmental challenges that we face here in Hawaii. The impetus for starting LHC and having LHC is threefold. We're seeing how fragile and vulnerable our society and economy are, especially in this COVID crisis. But even pre-COVID, Hawaii had significant challenges. So LHC is really, to help encourage those who have capital to really push on the moral imperative for them to use that capital to help us solve for these challenges. Another one is our government and our political environment, right? The social contract that our government is supposed to be in service of the people and our well-being is, it's rapidly deteriorating, and it's being replaced by, special interests, serving special interests, and the growing uncertainty, the dysfunction, and even kind of that deterioration of trust between us and our government really disenables progress. So it's up to us to really step in and help to fill that and work together to solve for those things. But it's not all negative, right? There's also some really compelling opportunities and solutions here in Hawaii that are innovative and that are addressing our challenges. And these solutions need to be appropriately financed to be realized. When we talk about capital and investment, just to put it in perspective for you all here, historically, and for the most part, philanthropy and government were the primary funders and investors for addressing our social and environmental challenges. But as you can see from this slide, those assets pale in comparison to what's available in the private market. Each of these three sectors, they have different characteristics to their capital and how they can deploy it. They move at different speeds, have varying flexibility, and they have their own risk and return expectations. So, it's important for us to keep those things in mind, right? Because the challenge is, given the size, complexity, and urgency of the challenges that we face, if we're to have any chance at getting those solutions to market and to scale, we have to work across these capital silos and make the most of the limited assets from philanthropy and government, but also get private assets into play. So this is where LHC is providing alternatives to the way that capital can be deployed across sectors, and also in collaboration with each other to create the most leverage and the most impact for the limited resources we do have available to address our challenges. So this is kind of the context for which we're here today, and that our speakers are really going to be speaking to with the specific focus on our food system, right? What are the conditions and challenges faced by our food system, our stakeholders, and their solutions, and how might we strategically address them from a financial and investment perspective? So we're excited today to have 6 guests with us from the food system. Taylor Kellerman from Kualoa Ranch, Michelle Galimba from Kuahiwi Ranch, Jake Muise from Maui Nui Venison, Donna Shapiro from Hawaiʻi Cooperative, Nicole Milne from Kohala Center, and Claire Sullivan from MAʻO Organic Farms. So Taylor's going to open and provide us some systems level context and the work of the Ag Response and Recovery Working Group. And it is the work of this group that is the basis and was the initiation for this webinar and for us to share this out. Michelle, Jake, and Donna are going to provide some examples of what kind of capital it took to build their businesses and the insights that they have learned and some recommendations they would make to the sector and to others who are looking to make a play into the food system solutions. And then Claire and Nicole are going to round us out, and they are also members of the Ag Working Group, both in their day-to-day jobs and work. They're trying to get money and to fund our food system, so they know about the struggles, and they're going to offer their insights and reflections from what we hear today. So let me get our panelists ready to go. Bear with me, I'm trying to learn how to use all of these tools for the webinar. And so Taylor is up first. Hey Taylor, you're unmuted, hey? So Taylor, take it away.
Hello, hi everyone. Thanks very much for joining us today. Very glad to discuss all of the things that Keoni had brought up, and it's a pleasure to be a part of this group. Very quickly, just kind of on a self-qualification type of scenario, I am the Director of Diversified Agriculture and Land Stewardship for Kualoa Ranch. I'm also the board president for Oahu RC&D and the Ag Leadership Foundation of Hawaii. Kualoa Ranch, although more well-known oftentimes for movies and ATVs, actually has a pretty rich agricultural history and only went into the transition of tourism in the early 1980s. With the growth of that business came the growth in agriculture and the diversification of our crops and everything that we grow. And so in a way, you could almost consider us a small microcosm for the state in consideration of agriculture itself. When the COVID effect hit, we were absolutely and in no way immune to that. And unfortunately, our entire market basically went from unfulfillable to non-existent. We were able to transition into a drive-through market and now actually a COVID walk-through market. But I feel like our experience here is very relevant to the state simply because of our combination of visitor and agriculture. So it's kind of been it's been a great way to learn things. Next slide, please. So as Keoni mentioned, you know, this presentation stems from the collective work of the Agricultural Response and Recovery Working Group, which is basically a group of like-minded individuals who have a vested interest in taking a situation that may start off as a major negative, but find ways to turn it into a growth opportunity, and as well as a resiliency that we'd like to see. Weekly meetings, multiple conversations, a lot of productive discourse, a lot of subcommittee back and forth, as you can imagine, has resulted in the creation of a matrix that calls out different tools and different strategies that we feel collectively will help take care of these goals that were aforementioned. When you look at our collective forces, we have everybody from Farm Bureau to Farmers Union, state and federal, ag partners, producers, academics. Everybody articulated their moment. And the three bullets that you see, I don't normally read off of slides, but I want to hit these home. You know, mobilize local food production to address immediate community feeding needs, contribute to Hawaii's economic recovery, and build a lasting food system capacity to grow a more resilient Hawaii. So a lot like the state's plan and a lot like what Oshima is working on, we're looking at stabilization, reopening, recovery, and resilience. And really it's something that I think the passion for our industry is what brought us together. Next slide, please. So when you look at this slide here, what we found is that I think over the course of the first 4 calls, it was really just a brain trust and a brainstorm. And so by taking all of the issues, taking all of the possible solutions, and then putting those through a filter of reality as well as diversity and inclusivity, we were able to come up with this top line, which we're calling our tools. So things that you see up there are ways that we feel we can make an impact on the 3 factors of carrying us out of this current situation. And what you see on the vertical column, the philanthropy, government, and private sector, kind of as Keoni mentioned, that represents the capital. And so what we're looking at is basically calling it the tools for a pathway to success. And I think what we're looking at is where the checks are, or excuse me, not I think, but where the checks are typically where these capital sources are utilized. However, but what we're hoping today is to show you that if you confine yourself too much to this model, there's a lot of opportunities that could be missed. Next slide, please. Sorry, next slide, Keoni. Oh, thank you. Okay. Nope. Back to that one. Thank you very much. So one of the things is that in order to make a significant improvement or shift, like any decision making that is kind of a big boat that's hard to turn, you need baselines and benchmarks. I mean, those are crucial for good decision making. Accurate and timely information is required to guide that decision making. And this slide outlines some of those key needs for that cohesive push. So basically every one of these bullets we feel is where information is going to be crucial to be able to make decisions that are going to be impactful, pertinent, and relevant. Data and analysis should be foundational to all of our decision making, not just in agriculture, but statewide. And unfortunately, in agriculture, as we know, and particularly in recent history, these efforts themselves, in other words, the data collection, really needs to be bolstered and funded themselves. So it's something that we are very, very adamant about pursuing to try to get that baseline going. Next slide, please. So public awareness campaign. So, you know, COVID has presented an unprecedented shift in the recognition of local agriculture. We had a pretty decent direct to consumer market share. And what we found was once COVID hit and lockdown happened, I think people who always wanted to support and felt that local was something that was a good thing, all of a sudden started supporting with their dollars instead of their likes. It was something that I've never seen in my 20 years in agriculture. And the reality is that, you know, consumers' buying habits have shifted. One of our group members pointed out that, you know, this is one of the most significant behavioral change or shifts since World War II. So what we're looking at is decades worth of change, decades worth of human behavior has now been changed in the matter of months. And, you know, in this compressed moment, it would be an absolute, we're looking to do is we have to keep that momentum going. We can't squander this moment. So a lot of that is where we come to this presentation today and trying to put forth the effort to maintain and even accelerate public awareness. So that can be done through grants in regards to the public awareness. This can also be fortified by building incentives and with policies, tax credit, and subsidies. The state has an opportunity to lead by example because by placing things like requirements for local goods, pricing, you can actually create a subsidy through the acquisition of goods. So not that old traditional version of subsidy that one might remember from the plantation days. If we can get this through the state as one of the biggest procure of foods, we feel like that could be a great example for the private sector. Next slide, please. Increasing market access. So, you know, the reality is, the gorilla in the room is that we do have a few large players in agriculture. There's no denying that. However, Hawaii has gone from more of a plantation type of setup to essentially a collective of small to medium growers. What we've been finding is, with this dynamic, is that the process of feeding people, in other words, procurement, logistics, distribution, that's really set up for really more of a critical mass. So when you don't have that critical mass, it creates breaks in the chain, it creates market share deficiencies, and it basically makes it so that locals can't compete. So what we're looking at is, these are just examples. There's a lot of them, but these are examples of how we feel that through aggregation, technology, infrastructure, enhancements, essentially, that we can create a system so that these local markets can compete with the larger folks that have that critical mass. What you see in red are examples of the tools identified in the previous matrix. And we're feeling that these are examples that can drive those needs. And you're going to hear examples of those today through some of those producers. Next slide, please. All right, so you know, this last 2 months, I feel like I've gotten a new email every day talking about a different type of financial assistance, credit, opportunity, and this is all fantastic. I don't want to in any way imply that the amount of help out there and the amount of opportunity is slight. However, what we did want to point out is that credit is not new to agriculture. And quite frankly, the way credit works in agriculture is based off of how agriculture works. Farmers have business models where they basically spending is matched to expected yields. Income is then matched to those expected markets. Those markets have an expected price. That's basically how that works. Well, we're in a situation where farmers' businesses have been completely upended. Their markets dried up or went away, or they had to go to more wholesale. Basically, that entire process based off of income that is perceived is no longer there. So when you think about the whole forgiveness and forbearance, this isn't a charity call out. This is something where you have a group of people who no longer can support themselves because their income is gone. So if we want to see them survive, we need to give them the opportunity to at least get a lifeline and pull themselves out of this hole caused by the financial disruption of COVID. Flexible terms have a lot to do with things, I think, in that post-forgiveness era, when you look at ag tends to be high interest and fairly aggressive. So if we kind of look at maybe changing terms to make them more prudent for people who need to build their income back up. And lastly, guarantees are a huge, huge opportunity for people to leverage their balance sheet. The reality is that farmers don't necessarily have the best line of defense when it comes to trying to get ag loans directly, get loans directly from banks. So we go to ag loans. But if you have people who want to be heroes, I really recommend a huge thing is basically providing that no risk or that guarantee using your balance sheet so that the farmer can farm, the lender can lend, and you can be a major player in the recovery of our industry. With that being said, I did want to introduce the next speaker, Michelle Galimba, a very good friend of mine and a wonderful example of someone who has seen a lot of these issues, and I appreciate you listening to what I have to say. Thank you very much.
So hi there, aloha everyone. Thanks for being on this webinar and for your interest in financing agriculture. Yeah, my name is Michelle Galimba, and I'm the Vice President and part owner of Kuahiwi Ranch, which my family started in 1993, and which is located in Ka'u district on Hawaii Island. We produce grass-fed beef for local markets, including Foodland, Whole Foods, a few restaurants, and our local farmers market. We also just started last year a small farm and feed store on our ranch, which our local community has been really appreciative of, especially during these last few months where everybody just really wanted to stay in their community and as close to home as possible. We have a herd of approximately 3,000 head of cattle on 9,000 acres of land. Much of that land is leased land, and most of it still is on very short-term, year-to-year leases. So short-term land tenure has been one of our biggest risks as a ranch, as well as a barrier to making long-term investments in our land. So that's been probably one of the biggest strategies that we've worked on over the years, is trying to get longer term tenure for our land, our pastures. The photo that you see in front of you is of a friend of the family and Paniolo called Ryan Okimoto. And he has come to roundups and helped us out for over 20 years. So, and that's pretty common in ranching, to have just a lot of help from your community and friends, as well as family. Next slide, please. So this is a chart that tells a story of our ranch from the financial point of view. And as you can see, we started out in 1993 with one cow. So there's three things that I want to talk about with this slide. And the first one, of course, is that it's almost impossible to get funding as an agricultural startup with no assets. We pretty much self-financed for the first 10 years with a lot of sweat equity, a lot of friends volunteering to help us make fence and round up cattle. We had outside jobs, or we had financing from members of our family. We did get a grant from the old Rita H program, which was Rural Economic Transition Assistance Hawaii, which Daniel Inouye got during the sugarcane transition period. And that grant was really transformational for us. So it was, it was a huge amount of money for us. And it really helped us move from being a really marginal operation, barely getting by, to having a little bit of a leg up and having the resources we needed to just be a little bit more solid as an operation. The second thing I wanted to talk about is the gray bars, which are federal program money. So most of that money we got from the USDA, although some of it also came from Department of Agriculture. And a lot of that came from a specific program called EQIP, or Environmental Quality Incentives Program, which is a great program because it, as the name implies, it incentivizes farmers and ranchers to put into practice environmental quality practices. So in the case of ranchers, it's about rotational grazing, putting in the infrastructure for rotational grazing. And that helps, not only helps the farmer to be more productive, the rancher, but it also creates social benefits and environmental benefits, such as less erosion, increased carbon sequestration, increased soil organic matter, better water quality. So that program, we've made use of it over the years pretty consistently. It's a cost share program, which repays the rancher 75% of their cost of putting in practices that lead to higher environmental quality on their operation. And then the third thing that I wanted to talk about is the last couple of years, on the far right of the graph, and that is we were able in the last couple of years to move up Maslow's pyramid to going from just survival to being able to express some of our values as an operation. And so we were able to do some land conservation. So we were able to purchase an 800-acre piece of land, which is close to the coast. And we immediately put it into an agricultural conservation easement. And that conservation easement was facilitated by working with the Alakahakai Trail Association, with the Trust for Public Land and the Freeman Foundation. And it not only preserves agricultural land, but it also provides a lot of benefits, such as reduced runoff, light pollution for the coast, and preserving significant Native Hawaiian cultural resources. Next slide. Okay, so this slide, what I want to talk about with this is that pretty much from 2008 onward, all of the growth that you see there is based on moving towards local markets. So we didn't really increase the size of our herd or the land that we were using, but we were able to access better, more diverse markets with that. Next slide, please. So again, this is government was a major part of our story through grants, subsidies, cost share programs. And I think government does have a big part to play, because agriculture is such an essential fundamental business. And it's not a fast money kind of a thing. The payback is over the long term, and a lot of the times the payback is not just in capital, but it needs to be measured in environmental and social health, not just financial return. That being said, private capital and philanthropy do have a part to play, because they are more flexible and nimble, and can make those kind of strategic investments that can really help an operation move to the next level. Next slide, please. So what you see on the right is our price list for our farm store out here in Ka'u. And real quickly, I just wanted to talk about what I would recommend as a capital strategy would be flexible microgrant programs for startup farmers, because startup farmers need to, they can have a lot of different needs to get started. So it needs to be flexible. And then also that should be linked to access to financing, so that people have an easier time getting financing once they've already started. And I also would recommend access to the kind of environmental quality incentive programs that we were able to make use of through the federal government, but perhaps there could also be philanthropic or private funding for those kind of programs. As far as the way that the strategic way to help cattle ranching, and I think agriculture in general, is processing capacity. This was a risk before COVID, and it continues to be a risk. So funding decentralized processing capacity, I think, would be a great strategic investment in agriculture for ranching small modular or mobile slaughterhouses that are closer to the community. Would not only increase jobs, but it would also prioritize resilience, so that people would have, that we wouldn't be caught in the kind of situation where we have right now, where we have large slaughterhouses that go down and impact the entire system. And how can government, philanthropy, and private capital work together better? I think there's many ways for them to work together. I think public awareness is really important. I think we need to get agriculture in front of people all the time, because I can tell, like, agriculture just, it's out of sight, out of mind for a lot of people. So people need to be able to see agriculture daily, really. Like, I could get an article off of a major newspaper, and I can guarantee you on a list of essential workers, there'll be healthcare workers and grocery store clerks. And I'm not putting either of them down, but they'll forget farmers, and ranchers are necessary for there to be groceries for the grocery store workers to put out. And then access to diverse markets, of course, is, I think, really critical, and it helps with resilience. And again, as we mentioned earlier, data. Hawaii needs to have a better data collection system, because in the last fiscal crisis, that got hit first, and it really, really hurt Hawaii. So those are my recommendations. Thank you again for listening, and I will pass it on to our next speaker.
Thank you very much, Michelle. My name is Jake Muise. I'm one of the founders at Maui Nui Venison, along with my wife. For the past 8 years, we've been working towards this idea and our mission of balancing access deer populations here on Maui. Keoni, I don't know if you want to throw up that first slide. There it is, perfect. As you see here, this is a group of axis deer. Axis deer were introduced to Molokai in the late 1800s, Lanai in the 1920s, and Maui didn't see an introduction until the 1960s or 70s. And they are on a scary, almost very similar to about 3 months ago, COVID-19 curve for growth, with populations currently estimated on Maui at 30 to 40,000 deer and heading towards the 210 to 220,000 mark, where they'll reach carrying capacity, where they're already at on Lanai and Molokai. Next slide, Keoni. Michelle probably said it best in sweat equity. This is probably reads like a very typical entrepreneur slide. The first couple years were pretty long walks to the bank and to our savings account, and a whole bunch of unexpected costs. We were dealing with a model that I don't think anybody had tackled before, and whatever limited training I had via my bachelor's degree didn't quite prepare us for so much of the unexpected, and I think that's what a lot of entrepreneurs get themselves into. And so that was the first several years from there, and then we started to have a model that was working, and we were also dealing with the federal government. All of our deer are certified with the USDA, and convincing not only the federal government, but I mean anybody we talked to. I remember the first conversation I had with American Savings, and the first thing they said was that we have deer. So I think the entire concept was so foreign, and especially within the USDA and following those federal guidelines, the idea of harvesting a wild animal in the field and having to adhere to all of the same requirements that you would in a brick and mortar, made for some very slow going, and made turning that federal boat to accommodate that basically made up 4 or 5 of our first years. And then in those first years, because the idea was hard to sit with some people, the only place we could find equity was through initially local support privately, and almost all of that going towards CapEx expenditures. Our business is equipment heavy. I mean, Michelle just keyed on one of our primary bottlenecks here in Hawaii, which is processing. And when we went through our initial modeling, we knew from day one that there wasn't any way for us to do this without our own mobile slaughter facility, and we knew that was going to cost us $250,000 to $360,000, and we knew there was no way also to accomplish our mission of being able to harvest this animal in the wild and meeting them on their own terms without being able to move around. So there were a lot of expenditures on the capital side for us, especially as we also looked at being accountable for our management actions. We had to develop processes to survey these populations highly accurately to make sure that if we truly were moving towards this idea of balancing populations and them being a food resource and not over harvesting, we had to have the means to do that. And then the next big step for us, when we had a working model and we had the federal government on board and we had all of our internal bottlenecks out of the way, is we looked at our model and we looked at if we're truly mission-based and we're trying to balance these populations, what did we need to take those steps? Like, what margins do we need to grow organically to try and catch up to population growth? And the only way for us to do that was through highly specialized e-commerce partners that could help drive D2C business for us. And that was the impetus of us heading to the mainland. And I mean, I'll talk about that later, so I'll jump to the next slide. But that's where you see that founder equity in there is we did do that. So again, I mean, this slide, I guess, tells that same story. The model worked, and there was a very long period of time to kind of bring the federal government along with us. And I made some poor choices, chasing some shiny objects along the way. And that was maybe 2018, 19. And then we're seeing the growth that we need to help us take our next steps as a business through that support of private equity for CapEx expenditures and the influence and expertise some of those groups are bringing. Next slide, Keoni. So this looks a lot different than Michelle's, and both working towards that same objective of food resources here locally. And but that tells a story. Yeah, you can jump to the next one, Keoni. Thanks. So I think what was in taking a little bit of a different route, you know, as we talked through this group and we had a bit of a different experience, they thought it'd be interesting for us to share kind of our private equity experience. And again, like I talked about, we moved towards seeking very specific people that could help drive that mission for us. And that meant, you know, I started by saying, I want this one person. And I was 3 or 4 people removed from that person. And I just gradually, yeah, we got very lucky in the process in being connected with the right people. And those people believing in the mission of helping to balance these populations. And to that next point, we came into the conversation with these private equity groups being very mission focused. And I think that made for a much longer process for developing our term sheet and operating agreement, because I think I went through 7 or 8 different groups of lawyers, and like I had a little sticky note on my computer each time I had one of those calls that helped me stay focused on like what our mission was and the partners I needed involved to make sure that they understood that and there wasn't over harvesting, and our objective was to really balance population growth, because what would be good for our business but not good for our mission is to allow populations to continue to expand exponentially because it leaves us with significantly more inventory. But that's not what's best for our communities and ranchers and farmers. This invasive species problem has to be balanced, and we're one tool in a bunch of different solutions. But we work directly with ranchers and farmers to help balance those populations so that their food objectives can move forward, and we're creating a asset what would otherwise have been a liability without proper management. So COVID-19 has been kind of the best test of that relationship, like through the process and developing these term sheets and the relationships and finding out, you know, how all that would work with the group. We kept saying, this is our mission, and here's a community first, and this is a food resource first to Hawaii. And then COVID-19 hit, and I let the group know, oh, by the way, we're going to be budgeting into our harvesting schedule, donating thousands and thousands of pounds to the community when we're supposed to be getting ready for a July launch of all of our products at a nationwide scale and introducing this investment group. And to their credit, they said, absolutely. They said, your community should be supported first. I think we've done well over 18,000 pounds. We've got another 2,000 pounds sitting in the freezer right there that will continue to donate to the food bank. A big mahalo to so many incredible groups out there that take that food and turn it into even better food for our communities. So yeah, we I guess to recap, we're in a unique position where we're trying our best, and I think we are in position now to help make the next steps for us. And I wish somebody would have told me about grants earlier, because I think we're a good fit with a bunch of win-wins in what we do. It wasn't that we weren't aware of those grants. I think we weren't ready to ask for help, not having a lot of the federal hurdles out of the way. But we're definitely looking to take the next steps, and the next steps, the most important next steps being grow fast enough to support our community locally as a food resource, but also balance these populations and mitigate the damages they do to our other food producers. And with that, I think that was 10 minutes. I'll turn it over to Dana at the Ulu Co-op. Dana, you don't know this yet, but I just planted like 6 or 7 Ulu trees in my pasture. They have an incredible group there and an amazing co-op, and hopefully I can be a member of that in the near future once these things grow up and are tall enough. Thank you guys very much for your time.
Thank you, Jake. You are welcome to apply whenever you're ready. We take producers even before your trees mature. But aloha, everyone. Thank you for having me on this panel. Honored to be with everyone else here today. So I guess I'll just start by giving you a brief introduction to the Ulu Co-op. We are a farmer-owned cooperative business with about 85 members, mostly on the Big Island, a few in East Maui. We started in late 2016. So I guess we're the youngest enterprise on the panel. We're just about 3.5 years old. And when we started, the ulu industry in Hawaii was just emergent, I would say. There really wasn't much activity yet, but a lot of trees were in the ground, thanks to promotion by the Breadfruit Institute and other community partners over the last decade. And my own personal farm in South Kona was one of those young farms that had recently planted a lot of ulu trees. And so a lot of trees were just starting to come online and there was really no market. So the main impetus for forming the co-op was to pool farmers' resources and fruit so that we could achieve economies of scale faster than any one of us alone would be able to. And start to really harness the variety of capitals needed to do something significant in terms of adding at least minimal value to our fruit to extend the season and shelf life, because ulu is very hard to market fresh. It just has an extremely low shelf life and it's highly seasonal, and get it out more widely and market it so that it could become a more commonly eaten staple crop again. So that's the background of the co-op. And we've grown really quickly. We started with 9 farmers. So we've grown almost tenfold. And our volumes have as well. This past year, we aggregated about 100,000 pounds of fruit. And our first year, we had under 20,000 pounds. But over the next 5 years, we project 1 million pounds, again, just based on the trees already in the ground. So we have a huge challenge ahead of us in scaling our capacity, fundraising to be able to capitalize that growth. And as both Jake and Michelle noted, processing is a critical part of that, and it costs a lot of money to build manufacturing facilities, even aggregation facilities. And so we've been really fortunate to have the Department of Agriculture in the state as a partner early on, with support from the Hawaii Food Basket, who actually helped shepherd us into a state-owned ag hub facility in South Kona, which is still our flagship facility today. And so we have invested a lot in upgrading the facility. We're still working on upgrading it. And maybe you could go to the next slide. Thank you. So as I said, over the last 3 years, we've been working to grow pretty organically, pretty grassroots, which means very piecemeal. We have not really been able to raise a large amount of money through private investment, in part because of the cooperative model. I think it certainly can be done, but it's different, and there's very little technical expertise on the capitalization side of co-ops locally. So we've had to look out of state to get that know-how and advice, and we are working on that now. But also because ulu is so it's not new, but it's re-emerging, it's being revitalized. And I think a lot of maybe funders have been on the sidelines a bit more because there's a lot of unknowns associated with ulu. There's a lot of uncertainties about market demand, product development, even on the agronomic side, because it really hasn't been produced commercially before. And that's globally, not just in Hawaii. And so we've gotten to where we are today with about $860,000, almost exclusively from grants, some low interest community loans. And over the next few years, we're looking to raise another 2.3 million. A large chunk of that is for infrastructure and equipment to support our volume growth, and as well as education, market development and so forth. You could go to the next slide. Thank you. So this slide just shows the different sources of capital. So the 860,000 that's gotten us to where we are has been mostly grants from the USDA, a little bit from the state, mostly USDA programs. And that little sliver of blue at the bottom is debt. So our farmers do put in equity. They all buy a share of common stock, and it's an equal share per member, one member, one vote. That's essentially the co-op model. And we made the price of common stock intentionally very low, so there wouldn't be entry barriers to farmers to join, because the farmers are putting in a lot of risk by planting trees and maintaining trees, even without having, a for sure guaranteed market throughout the tree's 25-year productive life or more. And most of our farmers, as most farmers in Hawaii are very, very small scale, very diversified. They literally don't have a lot of free capital to invest. So while our farmers did put in equity, it was not enough to capitalize the whole project. And over the next 3 years, you see a bit more color in that larger bar graph. So the red chunk is, most of that actually has already been secured through CIP and GIA funds from the state. And the other slivers, you see a much bigger green sliver than before. We're actually in the middle of our first member offering, which is securing or offering preferred stock to our co-op members so they can invest additionally in the co-op and get dividends. And we are also going to be offering non-member equity opportunities, probably launching that in about 6 months, but already having conversations with potential investors. And then that top purple bar is recoverable grants. So we're seeking $500,000 in recoverable grants, which are basically 0% interest flexible term loans. And the purpose for that is that we have a solid business model, and I think very good potential for this to be a long-term profitable endeavor. But as Michelle noted, agriculture is a long game in terms of becoming profitable. And even our own horizon of breaking even is a few years out. So a recoverable grant gives us the flexibility that we need to make the investments we need to now, not be tied into high interest rates or a short term. And we think that that's more aligned to the business model that we have going. So this looks pretty similar to Michelle's pie chart. And I think that, you know, the government grants for us have been really key for all the reasons I mentioned. Our whole project is very much a social enterprise. It's about collective benefit. There's no individual benefit in any ounce of it, really. It helps fight climate change. It helps promote food security and cultural revitalization and so forth. So it's aligned to grants. I will also say that, you know, I think a big part of each business and each farm's financing path has to do with who the stakeholders are. And for me personally, because I've been leading the co-op since its inception, my background was in co-ops and it was in grant writing. Honestly, I did a lot of grant writing even before the co-op. And so I was familiar with that. You know, had someone else been in my shoes, it might have turned out differently and just as good. So I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong. It has to do with what's available and the experience and background of the people that are raising capital. Next slide, please. So just to respond to these questions, so we're currently raising 2.3 million and we've already secured 1.4. So that I think includes the funds that we're raising from our members right now. There's still a ton of hurdles, both in being a co-op and in dealing with Ulu, because there's still so much uncertainty from a market perspective. But we've found a lot of potential interest out there in both offering concessionary debt and bringing on non-member equity investors. None of that has been finalized, but we're feeling optimistic just by the interest that we've received. We continue to apply for a lot of grant funds, and here I'll note one real challenge of grants is that they're not always on the time frame of the private sector business. Sometimes they take a long time to receive, or they're only reimbursement based, and you always have to apply, and there's a lead time to get the funds, and sometimes restrictions about how you can use them that make them a lot more time consuming to administer. And the second question, co-ops offer a lot of advantages to their producer members and tend to be resilient for those interested in pursuing a co-op structure. What are our insights for success? So I think the most important one is that the co-op has to serve a need. If it doesn't serve an unmet need for its members aren't going to buy in. They're gonna address their need in some other way. So for our co-op, the services the co-op provides, in addition to aggregation, processing, and marketing for its members, are a lot of technical assistance, ongoing training, because growing Ulu commercially is new. So, you know, that's a need that they clearly need, and I think that's a big reason why we've been successful recruiting farmers. And another key, I would say, from our experience is a strong central management. I've witnessed co-ops try to start up without a manager, where it's really just the members and a board doing everything on a volunteer basis. And I think that is really challenging and can lead to a more difficult time making decisions efficiently when there's a real strong central manager who's doing the research and putting in the time and getting paid for it, which is necessary for them to keep doing it, I think that really helps make everything more efficient. And the third thing is, you know, like Michelle noted, agriculture has a lot of benefits beyond the potential economic benefits. And for a co-op, I think that's even more so because there's a whole community that's developed around it. We do a ton of education with the public schools. And so we do a lot that's outside the scope of just the day-to-day business operations. And it takes a lot of hard work and a lot of time. And I think that's key, just being able and being committed to putting in that time. Thank you.
All right, so I wanted to start by saying thank you to Donna and Jake and Michelle for sharing. It's just incredibly valuable to get insight on such a granular level from your various experiences. You have different commodities, different timelines, you've availed yourself of different tools and approaches and even business structures. But there's some really interesting critical common themes that emerge from your stories that we're going to tease out a little bit now. First of all, you all have had to engage in partnerships and avail yourself of multiple funding sources. For none of you, was there a single funding source that met the totality or will continue to meet the totality of your scaling needs? Second, you're all engaged in increasing production and often in increasing our logistical capacity as well, particularly with the ULO Co-op for the matter. And then third, and to me this is the most interesting piece here, is that you are all solving for multiple problems. So at Kuahiwi, Michelle, you are growing food, but you're also engaged in landscape and ecosystem preservation. The work with the conservation easement means that there's a significant piece of land in Ka'u that's going to be in agriculture and or conservation in perpetuity. So it's meeting, again, not just food production needs, but communal needs. At the ULO Co-op, Donna's been doing food production, of course, but also building processing capacity and creating a systems linkage. And that linkage is really compelling because it's allowing multiple producers to connect with multiple end consumers through the function of a processing facility that's meeting the scaling and food safety considerations that none of those single producers would meet on its own. So again, solving for multiple problems through one enterprise. And then at Maui Nui, Jake, you of course doing food production, but also protecting others, meaning other farmers, other ranchers, even other golf course operators from pretty certain ecological and economic devastation that's going to be wreaked on them otherwise by axis deer. So that solving for multiple problems is this common theme that we see across all three of the presenters from whom we heard today. And it turns out, I think, that in fact, those three elements are inherent to most strategic investments in the ag sector. So to reiterate them, this is that they require essential partnerships, that they yield production and logistical capacity and an increase in that capacity, and that they serve as multipliers and amplifiers. So this last piece about multiplying and amplifying means that each investment is simultaneously contributing to the capacity of that single investee and providing a multiplicity of benefits for multiple actors and for the system as a whole. So this is where we get to the strategy involved. Because if we were looking at financing the recovery and resilience of Hawaii's food system as this whole single monolithic undertaking, it's just totally overwhelming, right? It's a completely daunting proposition. But when we start to look at it more strategically, and if we tackle it strategically with an eye to that which is really going to unlock the most capacity, and if we leverage resources from multiple sources, then as we just saw illustrated in the past three examples, we start getting to real change and making substantial progress. Nicole?
So we wanted to go through a few examples of initiatives or areas for investment that exemplify the role and the possibility of partnerships and the value of investing in things that amplify and multiply and are means to increase the production and logistical capacity within our agricultural sector. This first initiative I wanted to touch on was community food access. So for example, investments that can be made around increasing access to and the extent of the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, and specifically the Double Up Food Bucks Local Purchasing Program, has multiplier effects in that it fosters relationships between government, grocers, producers, and consumers. It incentivizes local food purchasing. It keeps money circulating in local economies and has benefits down to the household level in terms of health and nutrition. So while you may be initially thinking you want to solve for access to food and nutrition, the benefits spill over into other areas that benefit the local food community. The second area that we wanted to call out as an area for investment is in Hawaii's ancillary agricultural businesses. Hawaii lacks a really robust landscape of ancillary support services for agriculture, and examples of these industries include input and pesticide producers, farm machinery and equipment manufacturers, seed production, equipment rentals, packaging, co-packers, food processors. And investment in this space has multiple benefits of not only increasing employment opportunities, but fueling broader economic development in those areas, rural or urban, around those businesses, retaining, again, dollars in the local economy, expanding markets in terms of investment in co-packers and processors. And in some cases, and hopefully in most cases, it would lower the cost of production for agricultural producers. A related area that everyone today has touched on that's calling out for investment is around post-harvest storage and processing, including small and large animal slaughter. And investment in infrastructure is especially important in this age of increasing food safety regulations and the need for skilled employment opportunities for our workforce. And again, this need was brought up by everyone, and given the small scale of the majority of Hawaii's agricultural operations, as Donna mentioned, individual operator investment in capital intensive projects like processing don't pencil out, they don't make sound financial sense for the small operator. So investment in post-harvest infrastructure has multiple benefits. It generates employment, often through skilled jobs in processing, packing, marketing, even administration. These facilities, someone mentioned today, has the ability to ease entry and into agriculture and help retain producers. It's almost if you build it or if you invest in it, they will come approach. A thought that is really top of mind right now as the average age of farmers increases and means to increase farm profitability and incentivize beginning farmers is needed. And then lastly, when infrastructure, as Donna mentioned, is associated with an agricultural cooperative, it benefits multiple producers and it spreads out the operating costs amongst co-op membership. So it's a financially a large benefit for cooperatives to gather together around shared infrastructure. And typically cooperatives have a hard time accessing capital because a single member or the co-op manager has to put themselves on the dotted line at the bank. So investment in this space, having diverse financial tools and partnerships come to play in this area is very meaningful for a cooperative. And another multiplier opportunity that I wanted to mention, both Donna, everyone brought up also, are if you want to further the reach of your dollar, investing in food and agricultural projects that have ecosystem health benefits is another opportunity. An example, Maui Nui Venison, working to control an invasive species, has spillover benefits to the surrounding land use and agriculture. Michelle's example of how using the tool of a conservation easement for agriculture aids in farmland preservation and prevents the conversion of working lands to non-ag uses. And then, these showcase that an investment in a single producer yields multiple outcomes. You increase business profitability, but at the same time, you're having spillover social, cultural, and ecological benefits across the agricultural system. Claire?
Yeah, I'm gonna throw in 3 more examples that, like the ones that Nicole just mentioned, are all particularly noteworthy because they increase the capacity of the whole system and they serve the needs of multiple producers. So first of the three is this perennial bipartisan favorite, which somehow never gets funded, but our hope is, of course, to reverse that. Infrastructure. So these concrete, often literally concrete investments in water systems, irrigation systems, road access, shipping capacity. These are critical because they are foundational to the capacity of all of those individual producers to meet their needs and to succeed as enterprises. Second up are system linkages. And we've already talked about this a little bit in the case of the Ulu Co-op, which is serving to link multiple producers and consumers. This same function is served by food hubs and aggregators like Adaptations, which is really kind of the OG in the Hawaii space, as well as more recent newcomers like Kahumana, FarmLink, Oahu Fresh. These are the connective tissue of the system, and they're ensuring the flow and connection between producer and end consumer. So we really need to remember when we're talking about strategic investments, the role that those folks play in the system. And then third, certainly last but not least, is workforce development. And of course, I have a special place in my heart for this as a team, as a member of the MAʻO team. But all of us agree that we have an insufficient and insufficiently skilled workforce for our current food systems, and certainly for our aspirations of growing that food system into the future. When we invest in workforce development, we're investing in human capacity. This human capacity is critical because without it, all those other resources that we've been talking about, the financial capital, the infrastructure, all those other pieces remain latent until they're put into relationship with human capacity. So again, this piece cannot be overstated, that our investments in the human capacity through workforce development, whether those are apprenticeship programs like Go Farm or on-farm training, that is critical to the vitality and viability of the whole food system now and into the future.
Thanks, Claire. Keoni, could you go to that pie chart slide? Next one. Thank you. So we've seen this 3 different times now. This is the 4th. What does this pie chart tell us? You know, Jake, Donna, and Michelle all had the same chart, but each chart looked slightly different. Each business has different goals, has a unique suite of resources, and, you know, as Donna brought up, I love this point, has a biography, a person that's leading it that's unique and has access to and experience working in different spaces. You know, Donna and Michelle have relied heavily on government resources to build their businesses, and Jake has relied heavily on important partnerships within the private sector to begin to scale Maui Nui Venison. But what was consistent across all 3 pie charts is that they relied heavily on one source of funds over the others. So it wasn't that balanced. Another thing that the chart shows us is, or offers up, is a focus on relationships. If it takes 6 months to 6 years, given the different predictions for tourism to start and really come back, we have this small window of time to deepen existing relationships and forge new ones that can reimagine the role of agriculture and food in our island economy. And you know, we're preaching to the choir. We've seen so many examples of this already on the news in our communities, of people coming together to meet the needs of our communities in new and creative ways. But the small window of time has been made even shorter by the need that we have to spend the incoming federal COVID stimulus funds in full by the end of December. So, you know, at the top, the slide is, you know, this question about what bold partnerships can we embark on that leverage capital that can develop stronger and more resilient local food economies from the level of the household. You know, maybe it's a bold new relationship that each of you embarks on with your local CSA, you know, to the level of your neighborhood communities and our food economies at the county and the statewide level. And then how do these bold new partnerships, these relationships, nurture not just the financial component and health of our local food economy, but the social, cultural, and ecological aspects of our entire local food systems as well. And I heard someone say yesterday in a call that because everyone is in the same situation right now across the world, it wasn't just Hawaii that was hit by an hurricane and the federal government can bail us out. that it's going to be hard to look for relief from the outside or from above, and that the new normal is perhaps this heavy reliance on local creativity, local innovation, the fabric of our local economy. And this was Josh Stambro, and he said that it's been amazing to see how the city and county has worked really quickly and willingly to partner and to stand up new initiatives. So it's happening, and we've seen this, and we're in front of this window in time. And so this is an opportunity, I think, for everyone who's looking to invest in building our ag system, to think about creative ways to partner to balance out this pie chart that we're looking at, and leverage not just our capital, but our knowledge and our relationships, our networks and our experiences to help forward the agricultural system as a whole. And I think that, you know, when the tourists do come back in, you know, we'll share our local food again. But I feel like there's this collective sense of urgency that we need to make sure that all Hawaii residents continue to have equal access to Jake's venison and the co-op's ulu and locally raised beef and all the other items that are in the CSA bags and the butcher boxes and everything that I know everyone on this call has been dabbling in over the last 2 months. So, you know, while we will go back to sharing our food with tourists that come in, this question is, how do we support existing initiatives and to continue to think of new processes, new partnerships that we can develop to increase food equity and expand access for all of Hawaii's residents to this awesome local food. Claire.
So as Nicole was just alluding to, we've all been on this pretty interesting experiment around food systems for the past 2.5 months. Because the pandemic served as a forcing function, right? It's been a forcing function for the food system at the local level, at the global level. We're experiencing it in our personal daily lives. We're seeing it on the headlines. We're seeing really heartbreaking stories of dysfunction in our food system. And so what's happened is this exposure and exacerbation of the vulnerabilities that already existed in our food system. But the flip side of that is that, of course, it's been an invitation for us to identify the pieces that are missing so that we can create a more functioning and whole system. That invitation then provides us with an opportunity to articulate the investments and the policies that we need to fill in those pukas, because we know there's some serious pukas, to make the system whole. So returning us back to the top of this conversation with Taylor, the Ag Working Group convened at the beginning of this crisis/opportunity, because of course one is inherent in the other. And as a group, we got together to articulate a plan. And Taylor shared with you 3 pieces of that plan. There was a 4th, which was first to just keep ranchers and farmers afloat. And so that's a fundamental level. And then those next 3, I'm going to reiterate them here because this is really what collectively we're all talking about and trying to achieve together. Mobilize local food production to address immediate community feeding needs, contribute to Hawaii's economic recovery, and build a lasting food system with capacity to grow a more resilient Hawaii. So that's the goal, right? This is this big picture goal that we're all enthused about and committed to contributing to. Turns out when our group got together with all this diversity of experience and expertise and perspective, we collectively already knew what it is that we need to do to make our food systems more robust and to take them from niche to mainstream. This is a big deal. We already know what we need to do. We just are left with a question of how we're going to do it and how we're going to do it together. Whether you've seen the matrix already or not, hopefully you'll check it out afterward if you haven't. Once you do, you'll see there are a lot of cells in that matrix, right? There are a lot of activities, a lot of policies, a lot of funding needed. And again, if we look at it monolithically, it's overwhelming. But if we choose to be more strategic about what we tackle first and what we tackle together, then it starts to break down into something more manageable. What we're suggesting over the course of this conversation is that we should use the rubric that we've just been articulating, Nicole and I, of what will get us to the essential partnerships, the increase in the productive capacity, and the amplifiers and multipliers. If we focus on those 3 things and making our choices about what it is that we're going to invest in then we are going to be in a much better shape. Keoni, could you pop us to the last slide, please? Thanks. So we saw over the course of the presentations from the three producers that government has played a really essential role in helping to scale local food production to date, with the exception of our local bootstraps hero, Jake. But I think he's going to be availing himself of some of those opportunities now. Government will continue to be that critical partner, there is no doubt. But we are all aware that their own funding sources are under severe stress right now. It is now more important than ever that the philanthropic and private sector engage in the food system and engage in building a better food system. We believe collectively that if we work together as consumers and investors, as government actors, as philanthropists, and if we together prioritize local food systems, that we will be able collectively to realize the full potential of Aina Mamona, of a land of true abundance. And we're looking forward to digging into this idea, these questions, these opportunities with you in the Q&A now. Mahalo.
All right. Just want to say thank you for everybody who's been submitting questions. I'm going to start with Claire and Nicole since you guys are already up. I think this one is a good one for you. How can students interested in conducting food system research get involved?
Sorry, Keoni, could you repeat that?
How can students interested in conducting food system research get involved?
Oh, lots of choices. The one that comes to mind first, of course, is the Sustainable Community Food Systems program at UH West Oahu. There are, of course, great programs at UH Hilo and UH CTAR. SCFS comes to mind because it's particularly focused on food systems. So it's about the interaction between the components and the elements of the food system. But I would say, as a student, just get into one of those programs, connect with the local food producers in your region, ask them what questions they have, and engage on a collaborative research project.
Awesome. I got one for you, Nicole. It's from Janice Reichman. Is anyone familiar with Aggie bonds from the USDA and whether our DOA, Department of Agriculture, has considered them, including pros and cons?
Janice, I'm not familiar with them, and I saw your question and I was about to Google it, but then I got sucked into Jake's presentation. So I will look it up and I will get back to you and to everyone on the webinar today on that one. Thank you.
Yeah, any of the other panelists familiar or want to take a stab at that? No. Janice, we will get back to you. How about... Yeah, I'm going to throw this up, and panelists, you guys turn on your video and unmute yourselves if you want to take a stab at this. It came up a lot, so I think it's a good question. If we could subsidize processing, would that enable new small-scale startups and make us more resilient locally? So anybody want to take a stab at that? Michelle, Taylor?
Hi there, yeah. I can't start my video for some reason, but okay, here we go. Yes, subsidizing small processing plants is something that we've started doing here on Hawaii Island. We have a cooperative mobile slaughterhouse, and it could use more funding. It got some small business administrative funding, and it's going, but it actually needs a little bit more funding. So that would be a great opportunity to help a cooperative small slaughterhouse. There is another slaughterhouse on this small mobile slaughterhouse here on Hawaii Island that is privately owned. It's doing really well. It got federal funds to start as well, sort of in a sort of not directly, but it did benefit from federal funding. So those can work. It's not the easiest business to get into, but it is, I think, very rewarding to be able to provide food to the community. And there's a lot of mobile slaughterhouses on the mainland that function. There's a small modular slaughterhouse on Kauai that the Robinson family set up, and that is also very successful. So getting a little help in the form of subsidies can be, I think, very effective in getting that processing capacity back down to the communities, which it really wasn't that long ago that just about every community had a slaughterhouse there in the community that could, that supported the farmers and provided food for the community right there.
So Keoni, one thing I wanted to add also was that Michelle made a very good point about the slaughterhouses themselves, but one thing to also look at is that the harvesting of animals is really a two-part process, particularly if you're trying to get food to households, because when you go to an actual harvest plant, oftentimes they're just splitting or quartering carcasses. I don't know about you, but I can't usually handle the whole half of a cow in my freezer. So there's the whole component of what we call cut and wrap in the industry, which is costly to the rancher, but if they can take it all the way to that end, it helps with not only their price point, because you're now vertically integrated and you can actually take a finished product, but it also helps with household and direct to consumer basically procurement, simply because it's now a lot more approachable by families, whereas those larger cuts are not. So that is an additional cost. You normally have a kill cost and you have a cut and wrap cost. So I think it's also important to look at potential situations where that can also be included in the thought process.
Yeah, and I'll just second what Taylor said there, just as more of an example. When we were looking to build our model, we could only afford, which was step number one, which Taylor has outlined, which is the field process for us, like sourcing and harvesting those animals, then bring them in and slaughtering them, and that had to be portable. So we didn't really have a choice to work with local producers. But to an extreme end of that, we pack up these whole animals and send them all the way to Oregon to be cut and wrapped, and then send them all the way back to Hawaii frozen, because we don't have the funds to produce that yet locally, and we certainly plan to do so. But talk about an opportunity for sure. And that's something that could certainly be, that particular facility, especially on Maui, could be benefited by a number of producers here. So yeah, definitely a need for sure.
I'll throw one to Nicole or Claire from Mary. At what point do you think we can begin to see economies of scale so that local residents truly can enjoy the local food products on an equal footing with visitors and foodies?
I saw Mary's question and I loved it. Oh, Mary, I don't know. The first thing that comes to mind is if we could have more institutional purchasing, and if the institutions, I hate the word subsidy, but if the institutions were able to pay the farmers so that that was a good market for them to choose, comparable to going through restaurants and other direct-to-consumer markets, I think that we would see a greater demand for local food, and we would see operations then be able to scale their businesses. And that's my one idea that I have. Next, Claire.
I'll just tack on to that. I think the institutional purchasing is critical. It's one of the key ingredients to getting to scale. But we had a great example on this call from Donna of what it is to get to an economy of scale by working collectively rather than needing each and every producer to grow, and to grow really big, really fast. So I don't know, Donna, if you want to talk at all about what it means to you to be reaching economies of scale as a co-op.
Well, for us, when I think about economy of scale, it's very much tied to our break-even projections. Because for us to be viable, we need to be profitable. So in our model, that's, I would say, about 400,000 pounds of crops a year. I think every business is going to have their own, but I've heard that from a few other folks like FarmLink, for example, that there's sort of a threshold in terms of volume based on pricing that makes sense. And I think it could potentially happen very quickly if everything aligned. You know, we work with the Department of Education. They're one of our primary partners. More examples like that of institutions truly committing to local and working with their producer partners, and enhancing that relationship so that we can really count on the market. I mean, even with Department of Education, it's not their fault, but their demand is sometimes unpredictable. Sometimes it's a lot lower than they think, and there's no direct contract with growers. You know, as soon as we can lock in the market, we can help our producers build their capacity. But it has to be integrated, and it has to be market led. I mean, our model has actually been supply driven. I would not recommend it to everyone. It's very scary when you're sitting on 100,000 pounds of frozen ulu in your freezer and now you're looking for the market. But again, it's because of our mission orientation of really believing that the industry had a path. So I think that the turnaround could be quick, but the pieces have to be in place, and that includes market and funding.
Just going to add one more thing in there for Mary, which is that getting to scale, part of that is around land and production. And recalling Michelle's graph, there were 2 spikes in their revenue, and which also means spikes in their production, and they followed immediately after land acquisitions. So like Michelle was describing, the short land tenure meant that they couldn't invest in their production in a way that would yield the best outcomes. But once that land was owned, there's a totally different relationship with investing then, making capital investments to increase your productive capacity, which makes your food more affordable. There's a parallel that's happening at MAʻO right now, where the acquisition of land going from 24 acres to 281 acres is totally transformative. And it means that there can be then a commitment of capital resources to other aspects of the production, which will bring our costs down over time. The example in our case is that having that much productive capacity means it makes sense to invest in post-harvest processing equipment, basically, you know, fancy lettuce and carrot washers, which will remove the human labor from that piece of the equation, get people back outside into farming and decision-making and leadership, and out of the manual washing. And again, bring those costs down because it's bringing down labor. So it's all this intricate relationship, I think, between the various facets of each enterprise and then how those enterprises interface with the broader system. But we know that investments at critical points in processing capacity, in collective capacity, and in land ownership, and then tied in with institutional purchasing, are part of that system that's much more robust and gets us to more sustainable prices for the whole community.
Can I add one thought to the subsidy question? This is, you know, there's a lot of different kinds of subsidies that could be employed, but I think in Hawaii, we have very high land, energy, and labor costs. So if it was tied into a workforce development program, especially for these operations that are still very labor intensive, I think that's a kind of subsidy for a limited period of time that would also help address the workforce issue for the long term. And it could be built into, you know, internships or just job training. Just another idea.
Okay, I want to be mindful of time, and we're coming close to the end. So I'm going to do one more question. I'll throw it out to all of the panelists. It's a question from Robin. I'll read this. So being able to purchase produce directly or products directly from farmers would eliminate the middleman and make products more affordable. However, buyers need to feel safe with the produce purchased from farmers, and this is where GAP certification plays in. Many startup farmers do not have the capital to get certification because it can require infrastructure, irrigation, etc. Is there a plan to assist local farmers with certification?
I'll take a first stab at this because it's come up recently in working with USDA grant applications for the CFAP program. And I think that for those growers that don't have to be, that aren't covered by FSMA, by the Federal Food Safety Modernization Act, they should comply with GAP. And to comply with GAP, you need to implement a lot of on-farm practices that will make your food safer. And you need to pay for that third-party audit. And last year, I think the Department of Ag, what they did through their grant program, where you could apply for a $5,000 grant to cover food safety costs, that was an excellent tool to be able to help producers purchase some of the equipment to implement some of the changes on farm that would allow them to become certified. So I think that having a project like that, whether it's out of Department of Ag or another organization, would be so useful because that third-party cost is there, and the cost to be able to get to the point where you can bring that certifier out there is there. So yeah, I think it's working with our local CTAR offices to bring those food safety specialists out to the farms and get people the education that they need to then feel comfortable bringing in that third-party auditor.
All right.
Keoni, you're muted. Oh.
All right, so thank you, everybody. Appreciate you taking the time, and thank you to the panelists for making the time to really think this through with us and present and share your insights from the field and your expertise. For everybody who submitted questions that didn't get answered, we'll pull them all together, and we're gonna create a Google Doc with your questions, and we'll get answers from the panelists. We'll also share out a link to the recording, as well as the slides that were shared here today. So again, I want to thank everybody. These are the kind of conversations we need to have to really stimulate thought and innovation in how we're going to address some of our systemic issues. And food's a great place for us to start here. There's a lot of energy and intention and great ideas out there here in Hawaii. So we'll just keep these conversations moving. Feel free to send us any follow-up questions, and we will continue to keep this conversation going. And again, if you ask a question, we will answer it in the Google Doc and send it out to you shortly. So have a great day, everybody, and see you next time. Aloha.
Keoni, do we get to stay?